Thank you, Ellie. I personally found it really refreshing and insightful to have gotten that TED Talk application to have that counter narrative. So it's an example of what we should try and do in the sessions. Next up is one of our co-organizers, Sophie Hossein, who actually didn't want to submit anything because she was shy, and someone recorded her on a phone call, sent it to us in a group text, and we all voted yes. So, Sophie was born in the Bay, lives in Southern California, is a UCR major in psych and sociology, and her talk is going to be about how to dare greatly.
Hi everyone. Super excited to be here with all of you. So I would like to tell you all about two very different events that have occurred in my life. The first event was when I was 5 years old. I'll never forget, there was this Gothic cathedral that my family and I would always drive past. And it had huge dungeon-looking gates. It had spider webs. It would be pitch black at night. And I know it haunts my brother and I to this day. Well, one evening when my mother was, practicing negative reinforcement the Afghan way, her punishment was to drop me off there. It's funny, right? So, I'll never forget seeing her headlights drive off in the distance. And I'll bet she made a U-turn. She went up to the light, made a U-turn. What was minutes felt like an eternity for me. And I remember seeing her headlights drive off and my brother in that passenger seat. And I remember thinking that I'm not wanted. I'm not lovable. And that was 5-year-old me intellectualizing this situation. Now, the second event was when I was 13. And my family and I had just moved from Northern California to Southern California. It was my second week at my new school. And one day I was walking to my locker, and the cool kids who I really wanted to be friends with had stuffed a bunch of paper airplanes in my locker. I open my locker and these paper airplanes fall out. And there's a paper with Saddam Hussein and Osama on it. And it said, "Tell your family to leave us alone." There went my friendships. So, throughout the years, I gathered evidence for this. And that, for me, became the solid truth about who I was and what was important to me. And I became a people pleaser, which was a smart strategy in my mind because it made up for the real me not being sufficient. And I did what people pleasers needed to do to fit in and what people pleasers wouldn't do, which was a lot. And now this totally suppresses one's participation in life and self-expression. But the predominant response to the world was, "Leave me alone." So years later, I was fortunate enough to participate in a seminar that helped me realize the significance of these particular incidents and the role that they played in who I became and what was important to me. And what I got there was that me being a people pleaser is not who I am. It has nothing to do with who I am. And it had everything to do with the listening I had created for myself. And I'll get to what I mean by that in a bit. So what I got there was how to distinguish what happened from a story. What happened was that I was dropped off at this cathedral. My story was that I'm not lovable, I'm not wanted. So I let 5-year-old me dictate, define, and decide who I became for the next 15 years. But what I realized was that I have a say in who I create. So when it comes to relationships and the access to affinity, by that I mean the ability to empathize. So when it comes to relationships, the access to affinity and to engage authentically is really a function of communication. The kind of communication that allows all of us to be engaged powerfully and profoundly in new and productive ways. I mean, who's not interested in that? Well, how do you achieve it? It doesn't begin with your speaking, or speaking eloquently, or passionately. It begins with your listening. And when I speak about listening, I'm not speaking about your hearing. Most of us are unaware that our listening is not an empty vessel or an empty slate. Rather, we think whatever lands in our ears lands in our listening exactly as it was said. But I invite you all to see what we miss as human beings. There's always already something in our listening that shapes and constrains and even distorts what is being said. Remember, for example, the disempowered listening that I vowed to myself for so many years, that I'm not enough, so pretend like you are, Sophie, and how constraining it was? Well, imagine the damage we can cause with others through our fixed opinions and notions about them. There's literally nothing they can communicate or create with us that won't be shaped to be consistent with my already evaluations and judgments about them. How does this phenomenon work with our families and the people we live with? Well, we never tell our parents about our problems or our failures because they'll just add to it, or they'll get more mad about it, or we think they don't understand. So it's a lot easier to tell them the easier stuff and not the deeper stuff. So we shut down and we close off, and we don't talk to them about much. Somewhere along the way, I realized that I listened to my parents from, I already know. I already know that they don't understand or get this culture. I already know them. And having realized that, out of my commitment with love and affinity in my family, I let that judgment go. I gave up that listening and created a new listening with my commitment to discover them newly. And it's so incredible because now when I talk to them and now when I hear what they have to say, the way I listen is, wow, they're so amazing. They have so much wisdom to offer from all their experiences. And when I'm with them, they're being listened to and they're being learned from. And you see, they didn't change. What altered was my way of listening to them. And that makes the entire difference in the world. Now that I've made my point about authentic communication to reach affinity, it's inevitable that we'll run into this unnamed, prevailing trait in our culture that absolutely unravels connection in ways that I've seen many times before, but I've never understood. Shame. Shadow. So that brings me to my second point. Shame is really easily understood as the fear of disconnection. Is there something about me that, if other people know it or see it, I won't be worthy of connection? Well, as president of the Afghan Club at UCR, and as a co-organizer at this conference, I asked myself if people are engaged, are we engaged leaders? And that brings me to the point that I don't think engagement can happen without vulnerability, and I definitely don't think it can happen in the midst of shame. Let me ask you all honestly, with a show of hands, who here thinks vulnerability is a weakness? I'm so happy to see that, because it's not a weakness, and that myth is profoundly dangerous. If you think dealing with issues like worthiness, or authenticity, or vulnerability is not worthwhile because there are more pressing issues like the bottom line, or our job title, or standardized test scores, you're sadly mistaken. It underpins everything. And although not verbally taught to us, or many of us here, we can't know things like love, and belonging, and creativity, and individuality without vulnerability. But in our culture of reflexive cynicism, if you're going to put yourself out there for who you really are and want to be, you better also really have an understanding of shame in the Afghan culture. How so? There's that voice in your head, everybody has it, that's constantly reminding you about what your image will be perceived as. Some of you may be thinking, what voice? That voice. Shame feels the same for men and women, but it's absolutely organized by gender. If shame washes over me, and if shame washes over someone, it's going to feel the same. Everybody here has experienced the warm wash of shame. Shame for women is this web of unobtainable, conflicting, competing expectations about who we're supposed to be, and it's a straitjacket. For men, shame is not a bunch of competing, conflicting expectations. Shame is one. Do not be perceived as weak. The results that we see and will see at AAC, and the ideas and the potential of our peers, and the incredible music and the arts, is, in my opinion, an expected outcome of human potential when we're willing to be brave and vulnerable. The reason why this is so rare is not because of the human potential that's here. It's because of the human potential that's willing to be brave and vulnerable. We all have this capacity. It's a bravery conference. What makes you feel vulnerable? Watching time strip away at our parents' youth? Helplessly watching issues in our motherland while sitting in the comforts of our own home? Initiating getting to know someone? Being rejected? Telling your child you're depressed? Telling your mother you're having issues with your sexuality? Getting laid off? Telling your family you're more interested in your passion than the career they want you to pursue? This is the world we live in. We live in a vulnerable world. And one of the ways we deal with it is we numb vulnerability. I seriously doubt there's many people here who hasn't been the subject of major, heartbreaking criticism. There's a great quote that saved me this past year by Theodore Roosevelt, the man in the arena quote. And it goes like this: "It is not the critic who counts. It is not the man who sits and points how the doer of deeds could have done things better, and how he stumbles and falls. The credit goes to the man in the arena whose face is marred with dust and blood and sweat. But when he's in that arena, at best he wins, and at worst he loses. But when he fails, when he loses, he does so while daring greatly." And that's what this conference to me is about. That's what life is about being in that arena, about daring greatly. When you walk up to that arena and you put your hand on the door and you think, I'm going to go in and I'm going to try this. Shame is the gremlin who says, you're not good enough. You never finished that MBA. Your wife left you. I know your dad wasn't home, he was overseas. I know those things that happened to you growing up. I know you don't think you're smart enough, or strong enough, or pretty enough, or powerful enough. I know your family didn't pay attention even when you reached your dreams because you didn't become a doctor. Shame, shame, is that thing in our culture. If we're going to find our way back to each other, if we're going to help each other become the best versions of ourselves and work towards change and growth and development in our community, we have to know and understand empathy. Because empathy is the antidote to shame. If you put shame in a petri dish, it needs three things to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. If you put the same amount of shame in a petri dish and dose it with empathy, it can't survive. The two most powerful words in response to our struggles are, me too. And so, I'll leave you with this thought. If we're going to find our way back to each other, vulnerability is that path. And I know it's seductive and mysterious to stand outside that arena and think, I'm going to go in there when I'm perfect and when I'm bulletproof. And that is seductive. But the truth is that never happens. And even if you got as perfect as you could, or as bulletproof as you could possibly muster, that's not what we want to see. We want you to go in, we want to sit across from you, and we just want, for ourselves, the people we care about, and the people we work with, to dare greatly.
And to think she almost didn't audition. So next up, last but certainly not least, is Reza Hassabi. He was actually one of the